On Monday morning, October 29th, 2018, a brand new Boeing 737 MAX 8 lifted off from Jakarta, Indonesia. 189 people were on board, heading to Pangkal Pinang. The sun was just rising as Lion Air Flight 610 climbed into the sky. But minutes into the flight, at 6:30 a.m., as the aircraft flew 15 kilometers north off Tanjung Bungan, the pilots faced a terrifying struggle. The plane, less than a year old, began climbing and descending erratically, defying their commands. It was a battle against an invisible force that no pilot should ever have to fight. I'm Captain James Harlow, and after 28 years in commercial aviation, I've seen how complex and unforgiving the skies can be. Welcome aboard. Lion Air Flight 610 was flying a routine route from Jakarta Soekarno-Hatta International Airport to Pangkal Pinang Airport. This wasn't some obscure path, it was a daily occurrence, a journey taken by hundreds of people. The aircraft, registered as PKLQP, was a Boeing 737 MAX 8 that rolled off the assembly line in 2018, making it practically brand new. When a plane is brand new, you're talking about the latest technology and the most advanced systems. This jet had accumulated just 895 total flight hours. For perspective, a commercial airliner typically flies thousands of hours a year. 895 hours means this plane was barely broken in, like a new car with only a few thousand miles on it. It should have been at peak performance. Every takeoff and landing is called a cycle. This Boeing 737 MAX 8 had completed 443 cycles. That's a very small number for a commercial airliner, meaning the aircraft hadn't seen much operational wear and tear. It was equipped with the new CFMI LEAP 1B25 engines, designed for fuel efficiency and powerful thrust. All signs pointed to a routine, uneventful flight. The pilots on board Lion Air Flight 610 weren't identified in public reports, but any pilot flying for a major airline like Lion Air on a brand new aircraft has gone through extensive training. They were certified, highly experienced professionals who'd spent thousands of hours in simulators and real cockpits. They were two highly trained individuals responsible for 189 lives. But this wasn't just a machine in the sky. This was a vessel carrying 189 individual lives, each with their own story and destination. A young mother traveling for work. A seasoned business traveler making a routine commute. Dedicated crew members doing their job. Every one of those 189 people had a family waiting, a life interrupted. 0 survivors. That's the tragic reality of this disaster. The morning of October 29, 2018, began like so many others at Jakarta Soekarno-Hatta International Airport. Flight 610 followed strict pre-flight protocols. The aircraft appeared normal on the surface for its scheduled departure. But there was a critical issue that had surfaced the day before. On its previous flight from Denpasar to Jakarta, the pilots had experienced serious control issues, including unreliable airspeed readings and an automatic nose-down trim. The plane was trying to push its nose toward the ground without pilot input. Despite these problems, that crew managed to land safely and reported the issues. Maintenance crews worked on the plane overnight, conducted checks, cleared it for flight, and believed they had addressed the problem. But the same fundamental issue existed just 24 hours later. When Flight 610 pushed back from the gate, the crew was operating an aircraft that carried a hidden vulnerability, unbeknown to them in its full severity. The weather at Jakarta was standard, nothing unusual. The runway was clear, systems were reporting green, and the aircraft taxied for takeoff. At 6:20 in the morning, Lion Air Flight 610 was cleared for departure. The CFMI LEAP 1B25 engine spooled up, and the Boeing 737 MAX 8 accelerated down the runway. It lifted off smoothly, climbing into the pre-dawn sky, heading east over the Java Sea. Initially, the flight seemed routine. The aircraft descended as expected. But just 2 minutes into the flight, at about 400 feet, the first warning appeared. The captain's airspeed indicator began displaying erratic readings. Simultaneously, the stick shaker activated, a vibrating mechanism in the pilot's control column designed to warn of an impending stall. While the captain's instruments were misbehaving, the first officer's instruments showed correct airspeed and altitude. This created a dangerous situation, giving the pilots conflicting information. They couldn't assess what was truly happening. They initiated standard procedures for unreliable airspeed, attempting to verify speed using backup instruments and cross-checking with each other. They ran through checklists, trying to determine if they had an airspeed problem or simply an instrument malfunction. But the situation escalated beyond unreliable airspeed. The aircraft's angle of attack sensor on the captain's side was providing faulty data. The angle of attack is the angle between the wing and the oncoming air. Bad data can trick the aircraft's computer into thinking the plane is about to stall, even if it's not. In the Boeing 737 MAX 8, this faulty data triggered MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, an automated system designed to push the aircraft's nose down under certain conditions to prevent a stall. But fed bad data, MCAS became a critical danger. When MCAS activated, it commanded the aircraft to trim nose down. Trimming adjusts the horizontal stabilizer at the tail, pushing the nose up or down. A nose-down trim means the plane is diving. The pilots immediately reacted, pulling back on their control columns and using the trim switches to command the nose back up. This was pilot versus machine, except the machine was supposed to be helping, not fighting them. The pilots countered the first nose-down command, but MCAS, still receiving erroneous data, activated again and again. Over the next 10 minutes, this sequence repeated more than 24 times. Each time, the system pushed the nose down, and each time, the pilots fought to bring it back up. Imagine trying to drive a car where the steering wheel keeps pulling you into a ditch, and you have to constantly wrestle it back onto the road. This was happening at hundreds of miles per hour, thousands of feet in the air, with 189 lives at stake. The aircraft's flight path became a terrifying roller coaster. It would climb, then dip sharply as MCAS engaged, then be brought back up by the pilot's desperate efforts. Altitude fluctuated wildly, from roughly 5,000 feet, dropping to 4,000, then climbing again, then forced down. Passengers would have been acutely aware of the violent pitch changes. The sense of security would have evaporated. The cabin crew would have been struggling to maintain balance, trying to reassure terrified passengers while experiencing the same jarring forces. The pilots weren't just fighting MCAS. They were dealing with multiple alerts and warnings, all triggered by erroneous data. The constant alarms added immense pressure, making it nearly impossible to think clearly or isolate the root cause. They were facing an overwhelming barrage of information, much of it contradictory. They had to diagnose a critical system failure while simultaneously flying the plane. The investigation revealed that the angle of attack sensor, feeding incorrect data to MCAS, had not been properly calibrated or replaced after the issues on the previous flight. This was the crucial detail. Despite the previous crew's report and the maintenance work, the faulty sensor remained aboard Flight 610. This wasn't some unforeseen act of nature. It was a pre-existing condition, a critical flaw that had been missed or misunderstood. The same aircraft flew again with a known, serious control issue. As the battle continued, the aircraft's speed increased during the nose-down commands, stressing the airframe. The pilots attempted to disengage the automatic trim system, a procedure they'd been trained for. They tried the manual trim wheels, physical wheels in the cockpit that allow pilots to adjust the stabilizer manually, independent of automatic systems. They threw everything they had at the problem, trying every emergency procedure they knew. But they were running out of time, and the relentless system was winning. At approximately 5,000 feet, with the aircraft accelerating rapidly, MCAS engaged for the final time. The nose pitched sharply downward, too forcefully for the pilots to recover. The control columns were heavy in their hands, utterly unresponsive to their desperate pull. The aircraft entered an irreversible dive. In the cockpit, the airspeed indicator spun wildly, the ground proximity warning screaming, "Terrain! Pull up!" Master warning lights flashed red, a chaotic symphony of impending disaster. The crew knew their fight was over. Forces on the airframe were extreme, pinning passengers and crew against their seats. Terror in the cabin was absolute. The plane sliced through the morning air, gaining speed with every foot of descent. At 6:30 a.m., the aircraft, with 189 people on board, slammed into the Java Sea. Impact. Silence. The sea, calm moments before,
swallowed the wreckage whole. There was nothing left. The nose pointed straight down, a 70-degree angle toward the water. Inside the cockpit, the pilots fought a losing battle. Their control columns were jammed, heavy, unresponsive. They pulled back with all their strength, muscles straining,
but the plane didn't respond. The ground proximity warning screamed, "Terrain, pull up, terrain, pull up," mixing with master warning lights flashing red. The airspeed indicator needle spun past the limits, indicating a speed far beyond what the aircraft was designed for in such a dive. The world outside the windscreen became a blur of sea and sky rushing upward. They knew. In those final milliseconds, they understood the fight was over. In the cabin, forces were immense, pinning everyone against their seats. Passengers who'd unbuckled were thrown violently forward, then down. Objects flew through the air, meal carts, luggage, anything not secured. The comforting engine hum had turned into a terrifying roar of air tearing past the fuselage, a sound of unimaginable speed and stress. Some might have seen the blue-green blur of the Java Sea rushing up to meet them, the last image they ever saw. Light changed from the dim morning glow to a dark, deep blue as the plane hurtled toward the water. There was primal fear, an understanding that this was the end. A final prayer, or simply a wordless realization. The cabin pressurized, then rapidly depressurized, a sharp, painful pop in everyone's ears, a final shock before impact. There was no time for recovery. The previous 10 minutes had been a relentless, exhausting fight against a system that repeatedly tried to drive the plane into the sea. The pilots deployed every emergency procedure, attempted to disconnect the automatic systems, even tried to manually trim the aircraft. But the speed and nose-down attitude had become too extreme. The aerodynamic forces on the horizontal stabilizer were too great for the manual trim wheels to overcome. The plane was moving too fast, descending too steeply. There was no way to pull it back up, no way to regain control. The immediate aftermath was shock and disbelief. Fishermen in the area witnessed the terrifying descent and were the first to report the crash. They saw the impact, a massive splash in the calm morning waters, followed by sudden silence. Within minutes, Indonesian search and rescue agencies were alerted. The crash location, 15 kilometers north off Tanjung Bungan, was quickly identified. Boats and helicopters were dispatched. But as they arrived, they found only a debris field scattered across the Java Sea. Small pieces of aircraft, personal belongings, and human remains. No large wreckage. The plane had disintegrated on impact. Families waiting at Pangkal Pinang Airport learned the horrific truth. The NTSC, Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, began its investigation almost immediately. The primary factor that set this tragedy in motion was a critical failure in the aircraft's angle of attack sensor, compounded by severely inadequate maintenance. This wasn't an issue that suddenly appeared on Flight 610. The same sensor had malfunctioned just 24 hours earlier, leading to significant control problems. That crew managed to land safely and reported the issues. But despite those clear warnings, maintenance performed overnight failed to correctly identify or fix the faulty sensor. It wasn't replaced, wasn't properly calibrated, and wasn't confirmed to be working before the aircraft was cleared for its next flight. The aircraft departed with a known, serious, unaddressed defect. It was a ticking time bomb, carrying a flaw that should have kept it grounded. This wasn't unforeseen. It was a missed opportunity to prevent disaster. Second, the design and operational characteristics of MCAS played a destructive role when fed erroneous data. MCAS was a new automated flight control function designed to subtly push the aircraft's nose down under specific conditions to enhance handling and prevent a stall. The crucial issue, MCAS relied on input from a single angle of attack sensor. If that sensor provided incorrect data, as it did on Flight 610, MCAS would repeatedly command the aircraft's nose down, even if the plane wasn't nearing a stall. The system was designed to reset and re-engage after each pilot input that countered its command, creating a relentless automated struggle. The pilots were fighting an invisible, persistent force that kept trying to drive the aircraft into the ground, based on faulty information. This design allowed a single point of failure to trigger such a critical, repetitive command without immediate, clear pilot override or redundant checks. It proved to be a devastating vulnerability. Third, the overwhelming nature of the cockpit environment caused by cascading warnings and contradictory information created an impossible situation. As MCAS repeatedly pushed the nose down, it triggered multiple alerts. The stick shaker, erratic airspeed indicators, various warnings screaming for attention. The pilots received conflicting data, with the captain's instruments showing one thing and the first officer showing another, making accurate diagnosis nearly impossible. They weren't just fighting a physical struggle with the aircraft's controls, they were battling information overload, trying to process a cacophony of alarms and contradictory data in a high-stress, rapidly unfolding emergency. This barrage of confusing inputs, combined with the relentless and unexpected nature of MCAS commands, consumed precious time and mental capacity. Even highly trained pilots working under extreme pressure would struggle to identify and counteract a novel system failure that presented itself this way, especially one not explicitly detailed in their immediate emergency checklists. The NTSC investigation laid bare a series of critical failures. The angle of attack sensor, which had malfunctioned on the previous flight, was not properly repaired or replaced. This faulty sensor was the root cause, continuously feeding incorrect data to MCAS. The NTSC's final report, KNKT.18.10.35.04, also highlighted inadequate maintenance procedures at Lion Air, a lack of communication regarding the severity of the previous day's incident, and crucially, insufficient pilot training and awareness about MCAS. The pilots on Flight 610 were simply not equipped with the information or procedures to counter such a relentless and unexpected system malfunction. Out of this tragedy, and the equally devastating crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 just 5 months later, came profound changes across the aviation industry. The entire Boeing 737 MAX fleet worldwide was grounded for 20 months, a truly remarkable decision. This grounding allowed for a complete redesign of MCAS software, adding redundancy by requiring input from both angle of attack sensors and limiting its activation. New comprehensive pilot training was mandated globally, ensuring crews understood how MCAS worked and, critically, how to disengage it in an emergency. On November 18, 2020, the FAA issued an airworthiness directive, making these software updates and training requirements mandatory before the 737 MAX could return to service. These changes, born from the loss of Flight 610 and its sister accident, undoubtedly prevented further similar tragedies, potentially saving hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. The 189 people aboard Flight 610, who endured an unimaginable fight, ultimately left a legacy that made the skies safer for countless others. Given that the crew on the previous flight did report issues, and maintenance crews worked on the aircraft, what do you think was the biggest breakdown in the chain of events that allowed Lion Air Flight 610 to depart with such a critical, unaddressed fault? This channel exists because I believe these stories need to be told, not just as cautionary tales, but as vital lessons for future generations of pilots and passengers. If you found this explanation helpful, Please consider giving this video a like. It takes less than 2 seconds and truly helps YouTube show this important content to more people. And if you want to keep learning about aviation safety and lessons from these complex events, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Becoming a member offers extra ways to support this independent work, helping me dedicate more time to researching and producing these deep dives. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on the question I just asked. Head down to the comments section and let me know your perspective on where the system failed most critically for Flight 610. Your insights and discussions make this community so valuable.